I am Flora Swai and you're watching the official YouTube channel of the Indian Express. So the One Nation, One Election proposal has been making headlines for the last few days. And the synchronization of elections from local bodies to the Lok Sabha is a mammoth process and it will require a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to making changes to the constitution of the world's largest democracy. In order to discuss all these changes that will be made to the constitution, in case the proposal is approved and accepted, we have with us today our legal correspondent, Ajay Sinha Karpura. So, Ajay, the high level committee headed by the former President Ram Nath Kovind, they have recommended a total of 15 amendments to the constitution. Now, 15 is a very huge number. Can you tell me which would be likely the first amendment to be made to the constitution to facilitate the simultaneous elections?
So Flora, these amendments are going to come through if the recommendations are accepted, are going to come through in the form of two separate constitutional amendment bills. The first one, which would detail how this process would start, would introduce firstly a new article into the constitution called Article 82A.
Okay.
If this bill is passed by the Lok Sabha, the president would notify in the first sitting of the new Lok Sabha the introduction of this article.
Okay.
And that date where this article is notified will be known as the appointed date.
Okay.
And from then onwards is when we start calculating the simultaneous elections. So, 5 years from that date is when this constitutional amendment bill is when this committee recommends that we start these simultaneous elections.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, this article would be introduced. Essentially, all state legislative assemblies get put on a timeline.
Correct.
Any state assembly elections that took place before this appointed date won't necessarily be affected. But any elections that take place after this appointed date,
Correct.
their terms will essentially be shortened.
Okay.
These state assemblies, even if the elections are conducted 2 years, 3 years, or even 4 years after this appointed date,
Right.
they will have to, even they will have shortened terms because it will necessarily have to end
Right.
when the term of that Lok Sabha ends.
Right.
So say you've got the Telangana State Assembly elections,
Correct.
which will take place, I believe, in 2028.
Yeah.
Those, even though on paper currently that state assembly should have a tenure of 5 years,
Correct.
that tenure will be cut short by a huge margin.
Correct.
Because the next Lok Sabha's tenure will end in 2029.
Correct.
So that Telangana State Assembly's tenure will also have to end in 2029, so that all the assembly elections and the Lok Sabha elections can take place at the
Are
same
in
time.
sync.
Yes.
Are together. So, but then, you know what? There are a lot of probabilities to it in the sense that how long will this entire process take? You have to make massive changes. So how long will this entire process of making changes to the constitution, because you can't enact or enforce anything unless the constitution has been amended.
Yes.
How long will this entire process take so that we can go into action?
So the timeline isn't necessarily very clear on that. So it would be dependent on certain events taking place as opposed to a definitive timeline. That first constitutional amendment bill would have to be introduced.
Right.
And after that, the president would have to issue that notification in the first sitting of the Lok Sabha.
Right.
So presumably, if the next government wants to go ahead with simultaneous elections, this constitution amendment bill for simultaneous elections will have to be introduced at the when the right in the moment the first time the Lok Sabha first convenes. Then after that, there is a process. Assuming that bill is accepted, there is a second constitutional amendment bill that will have to be passed, because the Ram Nath Kovind committee has suggested that municipal elections and panchayat elections must also be conducted simultaneously.
Absolutely.
Yes, but these do not fall under the sole province and control of the central government or parliament.
Absolutely.
These are included in the state list of the constitution, which means that which means that if Parliament or the Lok Sabha feels the need to pass any laws, they will need ratification or the approval of at least half the states in the country. And only after they've gotten that approval from half the states can municipal and panchayat elections also be conducted at the same time.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So yes, those are the steps that will have to be fulfilled before we get to a simultaneous election.
You mentioned, we were taking the example of Telangana. Telangana's
Yes.
results were declared on December 3rd in 2023, and the next elections are due in 2028.
Yes.
But there are states, for example, like Odisha, that goes to its elections along with the Lok Sabha polls.
Yes.
Now, what about the states? Because India currently has the phased elections. There are states which will have elections for their assemblies even in 2028.
Yeah.
Or who will have elections, let's say in 2026 or 2027. Let's say we have simultaneous elections in 2027. But for example, the Odisha government has been re-elected, or there is a new government this year in 2024, but they have not completed their tenure.
Right.
So what happens to their tenure for the states that have not completed the 5-year term?
So one of the amendments that's included in that is recommended by the Ram Nath Kovind committee is that in these situations where a state assembly has been dissolved before its full term or its 5-year term ends, they will calculate that 5-year term will be calculated as according to the expired period and the unexpired period.
Okay.
The expired period will be from the moment that state assembly comes into being to the moment it dissolves early. If it dissolves early before this 5-year term ends, and the remaining amount of time is known as the unexpired period. If there is a new state assembly that is elected after the previous one is dissolved early, it will only serve for that unexpired period, making sure that these state assembly elections can then be conducted simultaneously with the Lok Sabha and other state assembly elections
So
again
they
as
have
well.
to readjust.
Yes, they have to
themselves.
readjust themselves, and those new state assemblies will have a shortened tenure again.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, India's political arena and the entire political structure is very diverse. We are the world's largest democracy. Now, we have legislative assemblies, we have legislative councils, we have states, but we also have union territories.
Yes.
So, what do these recommended amendments say about, union territories?
So the constitutional amendments are one basket, and in another much smaller basket, what they have suggested in the committee report are amendments to some statutes that are currently in existence.
Correct.
One of them is the Government of National Capital Territory of Delhi Act. Another one is the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act that was passed in 2019. And the other one is a statute relating to legislative assemblies in union territories, or
Okay.
another statute relating to governments in union territories,
Correct.
rather. For each of those, an identical provision has been introduced stating that they will have that the legislative councils or legislative assemblies in these territories will have 5-year terms, but they will come to an end when the tenure of the Lok Sabha comes to an end. So ensuring that at that first go around, at the very least, even if it means some of these legislative councils again have a shortened tenure, the elections will be conducted simultaneously with state assemblies and the Lok Sabha.
Absolutely. Let's say in a hypothetical scenario, due to some unforeseen circumstance or due to any reason, the ECI believes that simultaneous elections cannot be conducted in a
Right.
state or in a panchayat or in a municipality. What happens then? What provisions have been recommended?
So for state assemblies, what the amendment that has been recommended is that the ECI will recommend to the president. What happens in that situation is that the ECI will recommend that a state election cannot be conducted at the same time, and it'll have to be deferred to whatever date they believe it should be deferred to.
Correct.
So the term for that state assembly will not once again be extended by that amount of time. It will have to come to an end when the Lok Sabha term comes to an end. So what you can see as a common denominator among all of these amendments is that the Lok Sabha's term acts as sort of like a holy grail for each of these state assembly elections or panchayat elections or municipal elections.
Yeah.
Whenever that term is said to come, whenever that term comes to an end, the rest of the assemblies or the rest of the legislative bodies have to follow suit with the Lok Sabha.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, the Central Election Commission is a central poll body that regulates elections throughout. And then we have the state election commissions, the SECs. Now, like I mentioned before, that there are states that have state assemblies, there are states that have state legislative councils. Now, let's say that we have a one nation, one election, and the entire process comes under the ambit of the CEC. Now, what roles will the SECs play after that?
So the SECs will start playing a more consultative role for the election commission. Right now, they are responsible for maintaining electoral rolls for state assembly and for local body elections. They include details such as wards and other details that would be more known to say a local
Correct.
body than necessarily
Blocks, wards, all
exactly.
of those.
So, in order to maintain this single electoral roll that the Kovind Committee has suggested, the Election Commission must consult with these state election commissions in order to make sure that all of these details are now included in a single electoral roll that will be centralized under them. And so when simultaneous elections are then conducted next, it will be using the single electoral roll to sort of make sure voter details are correct, and that roll will be made in consultation with state election commissions. So the process is more centralized if the Kovind Committee's recommendations are accepted.
Absolutely. So, viewers, that was our legal correspondent, Ajay Sinha Karpuram, who took us into a deep dive into the various recommendations in the One Nation, One Election recommendation and what probable changes that would mean to the Constitution.